horror stories, tales.
Like and subscribe if you want to live.
The first thing Nora felt when they arrived at Lake Merrow was the silence, not the kind of peaceful, quiet people seek in nature, but something wrong, like the air itself was listening. The sky was a washed-out gray, the water still and black, reflecting no light, no life. Miles of forest surrounded the lake, pines standing like sentinels, frozen in mourning. The old cabin waited at the end of the dirt road, its porch sagging, its windows boarded from the inside. Evan turned off the car engine, and the silence grew heavier. For a moment, Nora thought she heard the faint sound of someone breathing inside the cabin. They were supposed to spend 3 nights here, a quiet weekend away from everything. Evan had found the place on an old rental site, the kind that didn't ask for deposits or reviews. The photos looked rustic, charming even. But now, standing in front of it, Nora felt her stomach twist. Something about the way the lake curved around the property seemed unnatural, almost deliberate, like the cabin had been placed exactly where the water wanted it. As they carried their bags up the steps, the boards groaned like voices trapped beneath them. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Dust floated in slanted beams of light, and the smell of damp wood filled her lungs. There was a fireplace at the center, unlit but stained with something dark that wasn't ash. A single photo hung above it, a man and woman standing by the lake, smiling stiffly, their faces too pale. Their eyes looked like they'd been painted on afterward, too glossy, too bright. Evan set their bags down and forced a smile. "See. Cozy," he said. Nora wanted to believe him, but the cabin's walls seemed to hum with something alive. The sound was faint, like a pulse behind the wood. She brushed her hand against the wall, and the vibration stopped. For a second, it almost felt like it had been breathing. They spent the evening unpacking and lighting the fireplace. When the flames flickered to life, the shadows in the room deepened instead of retreating. Nora sat near the window, staring at the lake. The surface was still too still. It didn't move with the wind, didn't ripple when a pine cone dropped into it. The reflection of the moon stretched across the surface, but when she looked up, there was no moon in the sky. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'm just tired." That night, as they lay in bed, the sound of dripping water woke her. She thought it was the faucet in the kitchen, but when she got up, the sound led her to the window instead. The lake shimmered faintly under a colorless sky. At the center of the black water, something was floating, a figure, pale, motionless. Nora froze. It looked like a woman, long hair fanned out around her head like seaweed. She blinked, and it was gone. When she turned away from the window, the photo above the fireplace was different. The woman's head was tilted now, her smile wider, her eyes darker. Evan stirred behind her, mumbling in his sleep, whispering something she couldn't make out. The words repeated softly, almost in rhythm with the dripping sound. She leaned closer. It wasn't dripping anymore. It was footsteps, slow, wet, coming from the porch. Nora's heart hammered in her chest as she backed toward the bedroom. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then silence. She waited, holding her breath. A moment later, something heavy slid across the porch, a dragging sound, like a body being pulled. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from screaming. When the sound stopped, she dared to look out the window again. The lake was perfectly calm, but there were fresh, muddy footprints leading from the water. Straight to the cabin door, and in the reflection of the window behind her, the woman from the photo was standing at the fireplace smiling. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind that didn't feel like morning at all. Nora woke up to the smell of damp air and something metallic like rust or old blood. The fire had burned out, though neither of them remembered letting it die. Evan was already awake, standing by the window, staring at the lake. His skin looked pale, his eyes darker than usual. When Nora asked what he was doing, he said quietly, "There's someone out there. They've been standing on the dock since dawn." Nora stepped closer. The fog on the lake was thick, rolling slow and low like smoke, but through it she could make out a shape at the far edge of the dock, motionless, too still to be alive, but too upright to be a trick of light. The air was colder by the window, as if the glass itself was breathing frost. She turned away, trying to shake the unease crawling down her spine. The cabin's kitchen looked worse in daylight, cabinets swollen with moisture, the fridge unplugged and full of mold, and the faint humming sound returning from the walls. When she pressed her ear against one of the panels, she could hear it clearly now, like whispering beneath the wood. Not voices, exactly, but something close, rhythmic, like words half-formed underwater. Evan found an old newspaper near the fireplace, folded between the floorboards. It was dated August 1984. The headline read, "Three found dead at Lake Merrow drowning suspected." Beneath the text was a photo of the same cabin they were standing in. The article mentioned a family, a couple and their daughter. The bodies were recovered from the lake, though one was never officially identified. The only thing the sheriff noted was that the lake refused to return the girl. Evan forced a laugh. Urban legends. You know, these lake towns, they make up ghost stories to scare people away. But Nora didn't laugh. Her eyes lingered on the article's last line. The cabin was built on the ruins of something older, something meant to stay buried. That afternoon, the air outside felt wrong again, heavy, electric, like the sky was holding its breath. Nora walked down toward the dock alone, trying to prove to herself there was nothing out there. The ground was soft, the grass wet even though it hadn't rained. Every step closer made the world quieter. Even the birds had stopped singing. When she reached the dock, the boards creaked under her shoes. The lake was flat and black, perfectly still, but she could see her reflection shifting even when she didn't move. Then something brushed her ankle, cold, wet, and human. She gasped, stumbling back, but there was nothing there. Only ripples spreading outward in perfect circles, as if something beneath the surface had touched her on. Purpose. She looked down again and her reflection smiled back. Not a trick of light, not her imagination. Her reflection's lips moved slowly, whispering something she couldn't hear. Nora turned and ran. When she got back to the cabin, Evan was sitting on the floor near the fireplace, the old photo in his lap. "Look," he said, voice trembling. They changed again. The faces in the picture were now completely different, not the pale couple anymore, but them. Nora and Evan, standing by the same lake, wearing the same clothes they had on now. Her stomach turned. "We're leaving," she said, "now." But when they tried to drive away, the road was gone. The dirt path that led to the main highway had disappeared under a thin layer of water stretching into the trees. The forest looked deeper, darker, as if it had grown overnight. Evan slammed his fists against the steering wheel. It can't just vanish. They walked half a mile before realizing the road curved back toward the cabin, no matter which direction they took. By dusk, they were both shivering, exhausted, and too afraid to speak. That night, the sounds started again. Not the dripping this time, something else. From beneath the floorboards came a soft thudding, like someone knocking from under the house. 3 times, then silence, then 3 more. The pattern repeated every few minutes, steady as a heartbeat. Nora covered her ears, whispering, "It's just pipes. Just old pipes." But she didn't believe it. Evan grabbed a flashlight and knelt near the noise. He pried up one of the floorboards. Cold air rushed out from the dark gap below, and the smell hit them, decay and lake water. The beam of the flashlight flickered across something wet and pale just inches below the floor. A hand, small, thin, fingernails broken and gray. Evan screamed and dropped the light. When he picked it up again, the hand was gone, but the water beneath the cabin rippled, faintly, like something had moved deeper. They didn't sleep. Nora sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames die again and again, no matter how much wood she added. Evan stared at the window, around 3 a.m. The fog grew thicker outside, so dense it pressed against the glass like a living thing. And through it, they both saw her, the woman from the lake, standing on the porch. Her hair hung down in wet strings, her eyes black and hollow. Water dripped from her fingers and pooled at her feet. Her head twitched slowly as she turned toward the window, and when she smiled, water poured from her mouth. Evan whispered, "Don't move." But the woman raised her hand and pressed it against the window pane. The glass fogged under her touch. Then, as they watched in frozen horror, a word appeared drawn by her finger from the other side of the glass. "Stay." The lights in the cabin flickered. The humming from the walls rose to a low moan. Every door slammed shut at once, sealing them in. Nora screamed and grabbed Evan's arm, but he was staring at the window, transfixed. His lips moved, repeating the same word again and again. "Stay. Stay. Stay." Nora slapped him across the face. He blinked like waking from a dream, trembling. "She's inside my head," he whispered. "I can hear her." A sudden thud echoed from the ceiling, footsteps above them, slow and wet. Then another, but there was no second floor. The night wrapped the lake in a heavy, suffocating silence. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. Inside the cabin, the old wood moaned under the weight of something unseen, as if the house itself remembered the things that had drowned here. Miles sat by the fogged window, staring at the black water. The lantern beside him flickered, a tiny, trembling heart in the vast darkness. He told Layla what he saw the night before, the face under the water that looked like hers, the eyes open and unblinking, the lips mouthing something soundless. He wanted to believe it was exhaustion, a trick of moonlight, but his skin still felt cold where the reflection had smiled back at him. Layla moved behind him, slow, almost ghost-like, her shadow sliding across the floorboards. "Miles," she whispered, her voice cracked and distant. "You went out there last night, didn't you?" He didn't answer. She already knew. He felt her eyes on him, not angry, not afraid, just hollow. "I heard you talking," she said. "Who were you talking to?" He swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. The memory played again in his mind, the rippling water, the faint whisper that came from beneath the lake's surface, calling his name again and again until he knelt at the shore like he was hypnotized. When he finally turned to her, the lantern sputtered and went out. For a moment there was only the dark thick, breathing, alive. Then a faint blue glow seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls, pulsating like underwater light. Layla stepped closer to the window, eyes wide. The lake was glowing. Miles rose, his chair scraping against the floor. They walked outside, barefoot on the wet grass. The air smelled like rain and rot. The entire lake shimmered with ghostly light, shapes moving just below the surface, hands, faces, strands of hair floating as if the water was full of the drowned. Then one of them reached up. Layla screamed as the pale hand broke the surface and dragged itself toward shore, pulling a figure with long black hair dripping like ink. Her body was wrung too thin, her skin gray, her eyes cloudy and blind. But her voice was clear when she whispered, "Give it back." The world spun around Miles as cold water pooled at his feet. Layla turned to him, trembling. "What does she mean?" Miles couldn't speak. The weight in his pocket grew heavy, the small round pendant he'd found tangled in the reeds earlier that day. He hadn't told her about it. It was carved with strange symbols, old and wet with slime. The moment he touched it, the water around him had gone still. The dead woman crawled closer, her fingers digging into the mud, her eyes never leaving his. "Give it back before it takes her," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger toward Layla. Before he could move, a violent gust of wind burst across the lake, blowing mist and leaves in every direction. The figure dissolved into water, vanishing with a hiss, leaving only ripples that reached the shore like dying breath. They ran back into the cabin, slamming the door. The lock rattled, the walls groaned, and the lantern flickered back to life on its own. Layla grabbed his arm. "Miles, what's happening to us?" He wanted to say something to calm her, but the pendant burned against his chest like fire. He pulled it out, staring at the strange carvings, the spiral pattern that seemed to move even when he held it still. "I found this," he admitted, "down by the water." "Maybe it belonged to her." Layla backed away, eyes wide. "You shouldn't have touched it." The sound of dripping echoed from the ceiling. Water began seeping through the cracks, spreading across the floor, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Layla's reflection shimmered in the puddle, except it wasn't her. The reflection smiled, even as she didn't. Then it reached up from the water. Miles shouted and pulled her back, but her legs sank into the wet wood as if the floor itself had turned to liquid. Her reflection's hands clawed at her ankles, dragging her down. He grabbed her arms, screaming her name, pulling with everything he had. The sound of rushing water filled the cabin, the windows bursting inward as the lake poured through every opening. Layla gasped, her eyes wild, reaching for him, her voice breaking apart into bubbles. Then she was gone, swallowed by the dark flood that filled the room in seconds. Miles surfaced outside, coughing, gasping for air, floating on the freezing lake under a dead sky. The cabin was gone, no roof, no walls, just pieces of wood drifting around him. He looked down and saw her beneath him, Layla suspended just below the water, eyes open, lips still moving in that same silent whisper. "Give it back." He screamed until his throat tore, but there was no one to hear. The forest stood silent, the moon staring down like an unblinking eye. He clutched the pendant, trembling. It pulsed. Once alive, and the lake went still again. Then, from the far side of the shore, another lantern flickered to life. A man stood there, watching him. Miles blinked through the fog, heart racing. The man looked exactly like him. Same face, same eyes, same trembling hand clutching the same pendant. And then the copy smiled. The light went out. The morning came pale and cold, washing the lake in a sheet of lifeless gray. Miles woke on the muddy shore, lungs burning, skin stiff with frost. His clothes clung to him, soaked in the smell of stagnant water and rot. The pendant was still in his fist, pressed so deep into his palm that it had drawn blood when he opened his hand. The metal was warm, humming faintly as if breathing. He looked around. The cabin was gone, nothing but scattered boards and the broken frame of the dock. Layla's name tore from his throat, echoing into the fog, but the lake didn't answer. Only the quiet hum of fellies, and somewhere far off, the sound of something knocking against wood, slow, steady, patient. He stumbled toward the sound, following it along the shore. Every few steps, he caught glimpses in the water pieces of faces, hands brushing the surface, eyes that opened and followed him as he moved. He kept walking. The sound grew louder. Then he saw it, an old rowboat half buried in the mud, rocking slightly though there was no wind. Inside, something was wrapped in plastic, tied with twine, the shape unmistakably human. His stomach clenched. He took one hesitant step forward. The knocking stopped. A crow landed on the boat's edge, tilting its head toward him. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the entire forest was holding its breath. Miles reached into the boat and pulled the plastic open just enough to see a face, water, swollen, pale, her hair floating like black grass. Layla. Her eyes were open, but when he touched her, her mouth opened too, and water poured out like a river. He stumbled back, screaming. The boat jerked violently, tipping to one side as something beneath it moved. A hand, gray and slick, shot out of the water, grabbing his ankle. He kicked free and fell into the mud, crawling backward until he hit the tree line. The lake roared like it was alive. The pendant throbbed in his chest pocket, glowing faintly through the fabric. His mind felt like glass cracking under pressure, flashes of Layla smiling on their first night here, her voice telling him they'd finally found peace, her reflection last night smiling when she didn't. He clutched his head, shaking. "It's not real," he muttered, but the forest didn't care. Something was watching him. He could feel it in the stillness, in the faint whisper of his name carried by no wind. Miles turned toward the woods. There was a narrow trail, one he didn't remember seeing before, winding through the trees toward the far side of the lake. He followed it, driven by something between desperation and madness. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his footsteps and his heartbeat. The trees grew denser, their trunks black with damp rot, their roots curling like bones. Then the smell hit him, iron and decay. He reached a clearing, and there it was, another cabin, identical to his, except older, darker, as if it had been built from the memory of the first. The windows were fogged, the door half open, the air around it shimmered faintly, like heat over asphalt. He stepped inside. The interior was the same layout, same table, same broken lantern, but dust and spiderwebs coated everything. It looked abandoned for decades. His hands shook as he touched the counter. The same pendant lay there, rusted but identical, engraved with the same symbols. He dropped his own on the table beside it. Both began to glow, pulsing together. The floorboards groaned. Then he heard it, a faint sobbing coming from the basement. He froze. Layla's voice. He moved toward the trapdoor in the corner, his every step creaking in the silence. When he pulled the door open, cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of the lake. The crying stopped. For a long moment he stood there, listening. Then a whisper rose from below. "You shouldn't have followed it here." His breath caught. "Layla?" The voice came again, closer now, echoing in impossible directions. "You're not supposed to be here, Miles. You took what belongs to the lake. Now it wants you too." He descended slowly, one hand on the wall. The steps were slick, the air heavy. The lantern he'd found barely lit more than a few feet ahead. The basement opened into a low, wide room. Water dripped from the ceiling. At the center was a pool of dark water, perfectly still despite the dripping. He approached, his reflection warped in the surface. But there was another reflection beside him, Layla's. She stood behind him, eyes empty, her skin gray. "You should have left me," she whispered. "I tried to save you." He spun around, but she was gone. The water rippled. Then he saw movement beneath the surface, dozens of faces, all watching him, mouths open, whispering in bubbles. The same words over and over. "Give it back, give it back." The pendant lifted from his hand, floating above the water, glowing like a dying star. The faces stretched upward, their pale hands reaching, but before they could touch it, a shadow rose from the center of the pool, tall, twisted, made of water and bone, its hollow eyes burning with blue light. The room shook as it spoke in a voice that wasn't sound but pressure in his skull. You broke the seal. The lantern shattered. The light died. Miles screamed, stumbling backward, his body slamming into the stairs. The shadow surged toward him, water crashing around like a living storm. He grabbed the pendant from the air and ran, climbing the stairs as the thing reached after him. The water followed, flooding the basement, the walls, the floor. He burst through the door into the forest as the cabin behind him exploded in a spray of black water and shattered wood. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing near the edge of the lake. Behind him, the forest fell silent again. Ahead, the lake shimmered faintly under the gray light. He stared into it, trembling, the pendant pulsing against his chest. He understood now. The thing in the lake wasn't haunting the cabin was part of it. It drew people here over and over, feeding on their guilt, their love, their fear, and now it wanted him to stay. He looked across the water. On the opposite shore stood the figure again, the man who looked like him. But this time, the man wasn't watching. He was walking toward the lake, slowly, deliberately, holding the pendant in his hand. Miles stared as the double stepped into the water, sinking deeper and deeper until only his face remained. Smiling as the ripples swallowed him whole, the lake went black. Miles closed his eyes. The rain returned that night, sweeping over the lake like a curtain of nails, slicing through the silence Miles had fallen into. He sat on the muddy shore, soaked, trembling, staring at the pendant that pulsed in his palm like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The cabin behind him was gone, burned, drowned, erased. Only the smell remained. The air was thick with it, that metallic sweetness that never really leaves after blood has touched wood. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Every shadow in the trees looked like Layla's outline. Every sound carried her voice, whispering things that felt too real to be memory. You brought it back. You shouldn't have. The lake glowed faintly, like something deep inside was breathing. Ripples moved against the wind. The reflection staring back wasn't his anymore. It was the other him, pale, cold, smiling. Miles gripped the pendant tighter. The water's glow brightened. His reflection blinked. Why are you fighting it? It whispered, though the lips didn't move. You already belong here. He stumbled backward, shaking his head, but the voice wasn't coming from the reflection anymore. It was inside his skull, layered with Layla's, with the others who had drowned here long before. The trees groaned, the ground trembled, and then he saw them. Bodies rising from the lake, their skin blackened, their eyes hollow, dripping. Lake water from their mouths. They stood in the shallows, dozens of them, swaying slightly as though waiting for something. The air froze around him. The pendant in his hand began to hum so loudly it vibrated through his bones. Miles screamed and threw it into the water. It didn't sink. It floated, spinning slowly. The bodies turned their heads toward it in perfect unison. Then one by one they began to speak in wet, broken voices. You brought us back. You broke the seal. Now it must begin again. Miles fell to his knees, clutching his head, his thoughts splitting apart. The memory hit him like lightning. Layla standing by the lake that first night, telling him they shouldn't have taken the pendant, from the ruins near the dock. The way she looked at it, almost afraid, the storm that came after, the reflection in the window that wasn't theirs. He remembered pulling her back when she tried to throw it into the water. He remembered her scream and then nothing, because he hadn't just found her body. He'd killed her. The realization ripped through him like glass. The pendant's light flared. The lake surged upward, waves rising higher and higher until they crashed into the trees. The bodies in the water began to fall apart, melting into black liquid that crawled toward him across the ground. You took what was never yours, the voice of the lake hissed, echoing from everywhere at once. Now you will take her place. Miles tried to run, but his feet sank into the mud, roots twisting around his ankles like hands. He screamed, clawing at the earth, but the more he fought, the deeper he sank. The water reached his knees, his waist, his chest. The pendant floated back toward him, stopping inches from his face, glowing like a dying star. In its reflection, he saw Layla standing on the surface of the lake, alive, unhurt, her hair whipping in the rain. She looked at him with a strange calmness. I tried to save you, she whispered, but you never listen. He reached for her, but his hand passed through her like smoke. The water pulled him down, filling his lungs, his ears, his mouth. He tried to scream, but the sound died in the current. Beneath the surface, the world changed. The water wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, alive, humming with something ancient. He saw flashes, other cabins, other faces, other lifetimes, people who came here drawn by guilt, by grief, by love, people who never left their memories, bled together, forming one long unbroken chain that ended with him. He saw himself again, building the cabin, hammering the nails, laughing with Layla. Except now he saw her eyes hollow, terrified as if she already knew how it would end. The light faded. The lake swallowed him. When the storm passed, the lake returned to stillness. The pendant drifted on the surface for a moment before sinking, slowly into the dark. Days later, a park ranger found a new cabin on the north side of the lake, clean, freshly built, as if it had always been there. The furniture was untouched. The air smelled of pine and rain, and on the table sat a single photograph in a cracked frame, a man and a woman smiling beside the lake, their faces blurred, water damaged. That night, the ranger dreamed of standing on the shore, looking into the reflection of the lake. He saw himself smiling back, and behind that reflection another pair of hands pressing against the surface, waiting to be remembered, because the lake never forgets. It only trades one soul for another, and somewhere beneath its black surface, Miles opened his eyes.